Honestly, there is no easy way to say this. It is really complicated from the outside looking in. But if you track the money trail, you are going to find Diddy somewhere with the Tupac situation. And everybody knows this. I mean, even the feds. The way you know also is when you think about the underlying factors surrounding the death, who was going to profit off it?
It was the kind of revelation that made headlines around the world. Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, a notorious figure in the world of hip-hop, had finally broken his silence. In a shocking admission, Keefe D. claimed to hold the key to solving one of the most infamous mysteries in music history, the murder of Tupac Amaru Shakur, and his accusation sent shockwaves through the industry, igniting controversy that hadn't been seen since the height of the East Coast-West Coast rap feud of the 1990s. According to Keefe D., Sean Diddy Combs, the man behind Bad Boy Records and one of the most influential figures in hip-hop, had more to do with Tupac's death than anyone had previously suspected. For years, rumors had swirled around Diddy's involvement in Tupac's assassination, but no one could confirm anything. Keefe D., however, claimed to have been at the center of it all. He was not just a witness, but an active participant. The world had long wondered if Diddy had ordered the hit on Tupac. And now, with Keefe D's startling revelations, it appeared that the truth was finally coming to light. Keefe D wasn't just spouting wild accusations. He came armed with chilling details, specifics that pointed directly to Diddy as the mastermind behind the murder. It wasn't just about Tupac's death either. Keefe D hinted at a broader web of violence and deception, implying that Diddy may have played a role in other high-profile killings. But to fully understand how we got here, we need to trace the origins of one of the bloodiest feuds in music history. The seeds of the East Coast-West Coast feud were planted long before Tupac's murder. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, hip-hop was still a relatively young genre, but it had already established itself as a powerful cultural force. Born on the streets of the Bronx, New York, hip-hop quickly spread across the country, with regional scenes popping up in cities like Los Angeles, Oakland, Atlanta, and Miami. But by the early 1990s, it was clear that two cities were emerging as the dominant forces in the industry: New York and Los Angeles. The East Coast, led by icons like Rakim, KRS-One, and LL Cool J, had long been the heart of hip-hop. But by the early 1990s, the West Coast was beginning to challenge that dominance, thanks to the groundbreaking work of artists like Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, and the group that put West Coast rap on the map, NWA. When NWA released their debut album, Straight Outta Compton, in 1988, it revolutionized the genre, bringing a raw, unfiltered perspective on life in South Central Los Angeles. The album's success paved the way for other West Coast artists to rise to prominence, and by the early 90s, the West Coast had become the epicenter of hip-hop, with Dr. Dre's The Chronic and Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style dominating the charts. But as the West Coast's influence grew, so did tensions with the East Coast. Many New York artists felt that their city was being pushed aside, and by the early 1990s, the rivalry between the two coasts had begun to take on a more personal tone. In 1991, Tim Dog, a rapper from the Bronx, released a diss track titled Fuck Compton, aimed squarely at the West Coast scene. The track was a declaration of war, and it sparked a series of back and forths between East Coast and West Coast artists. But it wasn't until 1994 that the rivalry would reach its boiling point, when Tupac Shakur was shot and robbed in the lobby of a Manhattan recording studio. November 30th, 1994, marked a turning point not just in Tupac's life, but in the entire history of hip-hop. That night, Tupac was ambushed by assailants in the lobby of Quad Recording Studios in Manhattan. He was shot 5 times and left for dead. Miraculously, he survived, but the attack would leave him with deep physical and emotional scars that would shape the rest of his life and fuel his vendetta against those he believed were responsible. Almost immediately, rumors began to circulate that Sean Diddy Combs and the notorious B.I.G. had orchestrated the attack. At the time, Diddy was the head of Bad Boy Records, and Biggie was his biggest star. Tupac, who had been friends with both men, felt betrayed. He believed that they had set him up, luring him to the studio that night so that he could be ambushed. Tupac's suspicions were compounded by the fact that Biggie released a song shortly after the shooting called "Who Shot Ya?", a track that many interpreted as a taunt directed at Tupac. Though Diddy and Biggie both denied any involvement in the shooting, Tupac was convinced that they were behind it. This was the moment that turned a simmering rivalry into a full-blown war. In the aftermath of the shooting, Tupac's music became more aggressive, more personal. He aimed his anger squarely at Diddy, Biggie, and Bad Boy Records. In 1995, Tupac signed with Death Row Records, the West Coast label founded by Suge Knight and Dr. Dre, and began releasing a series of diss tracks targeting the East Coast, most notably Hit 'Em Up, in which Tupac claimed to have slept with Biggie's wife and threatened violence against him and his crew. The feud between Bad Boy and Death Row, between the East Coast and West Coast, had now reached a fever pitch. And it was only a matter of time before the violence that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into something far more dangerous. While Tupac was firing shots at Bad Boy through his music, the rivalry between Death Row and Bad Boy was playing out in the streets. Suge Knight, the ruthless CEO of Death Row Records, had long been known for his violent tendencies, and he was more than willing to escalate the conflict with Diddy and his camp. In August 1995, during the Source Awards in New York, Suge Knight took the stage and delivered what would become one of the most infamous moments in hip-hop history. Standing before a crowd of East Coast artists, Suge made a thinly veiled attack on Diddy, saying, "Any artist out there who wants to be a star and doesn't want to worry about the executive producer being all in the videos, all on the records, dancing, come to Death Row." The crowd erupted in boos, and tensions between the two camps escalated even further. From that point on, the rivalry between Death Row and Bad Boy wasn't just about music, it was about pride, power, and dominance in the industry. Suge Knight and Diddy represented two very different approaches to the music business. While Suge ruled Death Row with an iron fist, often resorting to violence and intimidation to get what he wanted, Diddy was seen as more of a polished corporate figure. But as Keith D would later claim, behind Diddy's clean-cut image was a man willing to go to any lengths to protect his empire. According to Keith D, Diddy began to see Tupac as a serious threat to his business and his reputation. Tupac's diss tracks were making waves, and his alliance with Suge Knight was only adding fuel to the fire. If something wasn't done to silence Tupac, Diddy feared that his record label and his legacy would be irreparably damaged. The events of September 7, 1996 are well documented. Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight attended a boxing match between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. After the fight, Tupac and Suge got into a physical altercation with Orlando "Baby Lane" Anderson, a member of the Southside Compton Crips, who had previously tried to rob one of Tupac's associates. Later that night, as Tupac and Suge were driving down the Las Vegas Strip in a black BMW, a white Cadillac pulled up alongside them at a stoplight. Gunshots rang out, and Tupac was hit 4 times, once in the arm, once in the thigh, and twice in the chest. He was rushed to the hospital, where he died 6 days later from his injuries. The murder sent shockwaves through the music world and left fans and industry insiders alike searching for answers. Who had killed Tupac and why? In the years following Tupac's death, many theories emerged. Some believed it was a gang-related hit carried out by Orlando Anderson in retaliation for the earlier fight at the MGM Grand. Others suspected Suge Knight had orchestrated the murder to prevent Tupac from leaving Death Row Records. But one theory that never went away was the idea that Diddy had played a role in ordering the hit. For years, Diddy had managed to avoid being directly implicated in Tupac's murder. But in 2018, everything changed when Dwayne Keith D. Davis came forward with a confession that shocked the world. In an interview with BET for the documentary Death Row Chronicles, Keith D., a former member of the Southside Crips, admitted that he had been in the car with the shooters on the night Tupac was killed. But more importantly, he claimed that the hit had been ordered by none other than Sean Diddy Combs. According to Keith D., Diddy had approached him in the mid-90s and offered him $1 million to kill both Tupac and Suge Knight. Keith D said that while the payment was never fully made, the order had been clear. Diddy wanted Tupac dead. Keith D's confession provided the missing link in a theory that had long been circulating in the hip-hop community. For years, people had speculated that Diddy had ordered the hit on Tupac, but no one had ever come forward with direct evidence. Now, with Keith D's testimony, the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Keith D's account of the night of Tupac's murder matched up with the known facts of the case. He claimed that Orlando Anderson, his nephew and a fellow member of the Southside Crips, had been the one to pull the trigger, but the order had come from above, from Diddy himself. Keith D's confession didn't just implicate Diddy in Tupac's murder, it also raised questions about other deaths that had rocked the hip-hop world, most notably the murder of the notorious B.I.G. Just 6 months after Tupac was gunned down, Biggie Smalls was shot and killed in a drive-by shooting in Los Angeles. Many believed that Biggie's death was a direct retaliation for Tupac's murder, but Keith D suggested that there was more to the story. In his confession, Keith D hinted at a larger conspiracy, one that involved not just Diddy and Bad Boy Records, but also powerful figures within the Los Angeles underworld. He claimed that the same forces that had orchestrated Tupac's murder were also responsible for Biggie's death, creating a cycle of violence that claimed the lives of two of hip-hop's brightest stars. As the years have passed since Keith D's explosive confession, the hip-hop community has been left to grapple with the implications. If Diddy truly was involved in Tupac's murder, what does that say about the music industry's darker side? How many other deaths and acts of violence can be traced back to the rivalry between Death Row and Bad Boy Records? The East Coast-West Coast feud was more than just a clash of egos. It was a battle for supremacy in a cutthroat industry where power and influence often came at the cost of human lives. The deaths of Tupac and Biggie marked the end of an era, but their legacies continue to loom large over the world of hip-hop. For fans of Tupac, Keith D's revelations have provided some closure, but they have also reopened old wounds. The question now is whether justice will ever truly be served. Will Diddy, one of the most powerful figures in music, ever face consequences for his alleged role in Tupac's death? Or will the truth remain buried in the shadows of hip-hop's darkest chapter? For now, the story remains unfinished. But one thing is certain: the impact of Tupac's murder and the web of violence and betrayal that surrounds it will be felt for generations to come.